It's Christmas Eve, so I couldn't give up the chance to tell you a creepy Christmas story. And if you love Creep Time and you want longer content, make sure to check out my YouTube channel with the link in the bio. So we're pretty familiar with how the whole Santa situation works, right? I mean, we kind of get the gig. He comes down the chimney and he leaves us presents. But around the holiday season in 2015, a California home got an unexpected visitor down their chimney. After returning to their house, it was a cold evening, so they lit up a fire but were terrified when they heard the sounds of screaming coming from inside their chimney. Wedged between the bricks was a man who had attempted to sneak in and burglarize the house but had gotten stuck. The fire department arrived and rushed to dismantle the chimney to get him out in time, but with the heat of the fire there was too much damage caused and the burglar had died while trapped inside, making this a grisly holiday memory that this home would never forget. Question that has long plagued police is, what do we make of the McGrady tapes? So back in 2001, at a Blockbuster in McGrady, North Carolina, a car drove by in the parking lot and just dropped a tape outside of the building. So employees saw that and they went outside to get the tape and they were like, who would drop a tape off like that? Until they looked at it and they noticed something was wrong. This was the tape that was recovered from the parking lot and it was completely unlabeled. According to the story, they took it to the back room where they were able to play it back, and this was the footage they found. It is a 40-minute video of a person's face looking under what looks like a bathroom stall, and it's completely silent, like straight uncut 40 minutes of this and the cameraman just breathing heavily while they videotape this. Management turned the tape over to police, and the strangest part is that a search canine signaled that the tape had traces of human decomp on it. To this day, whoever's behind the McGrady tape is a mystery. I want you to take a look at this picture, snapped from a group of friends back in 2012. Let me explain the haunting backstory behind this picture. It's not for the faint of heart. These friends are thrill seekers, right? So their thing is that they go to explore abandoned buildings all throughout their state in Illinois. But there was one town in particular that really piqued their interest because allegedly it had a madman who was still on the loose. One who police believed was responsible for several bodies that were found in this area, all with their heads missing, assuming that he took them with him. So they come to this town because they're planning to spend the night in this abandoned hospital in this picture so they can record content. But as the night goes on and things get darker, they suddenly get this eerie feeling like they're not alone in this hospital. But while they're exploring in the dark, they start snapping pictures on their phone to try to illuminate the rooms that they're in, and they finally start to explore the showers, which was where they snapped this photo, which was more than enough to scare them into leaving. They didn't know what that was, so they called police, who searched the hospital and realized that's not a mask.
The most scary real stories that shock you. In 1920, an 8-year-old girl named Elizabeth disappeared in a small town. She was last seen in an old park near her house playing with a doll. The search lasted several days, but no trace was found. The residents of the city were terrified. The investigation continued for several months, but no evidence was ever found. However, a few years later, a strange rumor appeared. It was said that the doll that belonged to Elizabeth was found in the forest, and at night you can hear children laughing and crying. People began to avoid the forest and began to call it the Forest of Lost Souls. One day, a local hunter said that he saw a figure in the forest that looked like a girl in a white dress. He tried to catch up with her, but she disappeared in the dark. Since then, no one else dared to enter that forest. They say that the girl's soul remained there, and now she wanders through the forest, looking for her doll and trying to find her way home.
In the midst of an intense video game session, John's room shook with a strange noise from downstairs. Alarmed, he silenced the TV and strained to listen, but nothing. Resuming the game, the sound returned even louder. Curiosity and fear set in, and he hurried downstairs to investigate. Opening the basement door, a chilling breeze brushed past him. In the dimly lit basement, he noticed the wide open window, though he distinctly remembered closing it. Unease gripped him, heightened by the sight of the slightly ajar closet door. Heart pounding, he debated whether to confront the unknown within. Summoning bravery, he reached for the doorknob when an eerie crackle echoed from within. Panic surged and he sprinted upstairs. With trembling hands, he called 911. Rapidly, the police arrived. They swiftly combed the house, but all of a sudden, a gunshot sounded from the basement. They emerged, leading a disheveled man, his eyes wild, the officer's shaken voice saying. He aimed the gun at them upon opening the closet, narrowly missing his shot. Breathing a sigh of relief, John realized the terrifying truth. That could have been him the man was shooting at.
That make my skin crawl. This man stayed in a suite that he thought was a luxury suite, but what he finds hidden in the bathroom cupboard will make you never want to stay anywhere ever again. I thought hidden cameras in Airbnbs were bad, but this just blows that out of the water. This man was staying at a resort, and his room was one of the nicer rooms available. He starts by showing us into the bathroom. Looks divine. A standalone bath surrounded by clouded glass walls. How perfectly soothing to relax in, right? Not quite. There were a few full-length cupboards in the bathroom, but what he finds in the second one makes me feel sick. There's a trapdoor, but that's not the end of it. This leads to a whole hallway that runs behind the glass walls. Imagine taking a bath with an audience, as if this huge hidden corridor behind the wardrobe wasn't enough. There's yet another trapdoor. This leads to some kind of cellar, dungeon-looking room. What the hell is this? Is this just the layout of an old building? Or is this set up as something more sinister? Why have the trapdoor through the wardrobe from the hall and the dungeon? Who needs to be going into that room from the outside? What do you think this is? Is this normal for hotels?
This is why they started putting bells on grave sites. Being buried alive is probably one of the most terrifying things that could ever happen to you, and it actually happened a lot more than you think. One of the most infamous cases was of a woman who was buried alive not once, but twice. A woman named Alice drank a drink that contained poppy seed that put her into such a sedated state that the doctors pronounced her dead and quickly buried her. But a few days after they buried her, some children were playing above her gravesite, kind of weird, but okay, and they heard groans and screams coming from inside her grave. She had been fighting and clawing and doing everything she could to try to get out of her coffin, fighting with her literal life. A day later, they finally got in and got her body out, but she was so bloody and so bruised that she seemed like she was on the brink of death and didn't seem like she was moving. So, assuming that she had been alive for the last couple of days, but now she wasn't, they put her back in the grave and put her right back down. A graveyard worker was charged with the task of watching over her grave to make sure that if any other noises occurred throughout the night, they'd be able to pull her out. But sometime he decided that he didn't want to do that and he left to go to a local pub. However, she still hadn't died. She woke up in her coffin again. She scratched, she tore, she did everything she could, going into a full-blown panic about being put back in the ground. This time, when they went under to check her coffin to make sure that she had died, they found all the fresh scratches, all the fresh wounds from her trying to escape again, but this time, she had finally died. And that's why they started putting bells on gravesites.
Mommy told me something a little girl should know. It's all about the devil.
I have a creepy story time. If this is the type of content that you're into, feel free to follow along. I post a scary story every single day. The person who submitted this wishes to remain anonymous, so for the sake of the story, let's call him Victor. Now, Victor is a medium, which means that he is able to help people who have recently lost a loved one in order to deliver a message, or if they're having any type of experiences in their home. Back in 2006, him, his wife, and daughter had recently moved to Texas. Around this time is when they came across a family that were having issues in their home. It started off very small, like pictures falling off the wall, dishes were being moved, and keys were going missing, but nothing too crazy, just mainly annoying. But as time went on, it started to get worse. Victor was called, so he decided to go over there and take a walk around. The minute Victor walked into this house, he felt it. Now, this family had 2 young children. One was about 4, the other one was 6. So Victor suggested that they lay baby powder on the ground to try to eliminate some of the noises and the things going missing, to see if it was maybe the kids messing around. The next day at about 9 a.m., Victor gets a call from the family. He ends up going to the house. When he walks in, they show him one of the rooms where they laid the baby powder, and very clearly in cursive, the name Casey has been written out. Now, Casey happened to be Victor's daughter's name, and there was no way that anyone in the house could have been the one to write it out, because there were no footsteps around the name, 1, and 2, no one in the house knew his daughter's name. So Victor asked the family, "You guys know anyone by the name of Casey?" The family all responds with, "No, we don't know anyone by that name." Victor then tells the family that he cannot help them and starts to quickly leave the house. The family, of course, asks, "Why can't you help us? And who's Casey?" Victor explains to them that Casey is his daughter's name. And the fact that his daughter's name was written in cursive on the ground to him is a warning. Victor believed that this was a D word that was trying to come after him because he was helping the family.
A Russian sleep experiment involving 5 prisoners. Their cell was airtight, a stimulant gas was constantly pumped into it, which did not allow them to fall asleep. On the 5th day, the subjects showed signs of irritation and stress. They randomly wandered around the cell, muttering something, and periodically began to quietly complain about their cellmates into microphones. On the 9th day, wandering around the cell turned into general throwing and hysteria. On the 14th day, the prisoners began to go crazy. They howled, then sobbed. One of them decided to get rid of the surveillance system and carefully smeared all the mirrors with his feces. Since then, the observers could only hear the prisoners, but no one dared to enter them. Then suddenly there was silence. The level of oxygen consumption was high, as if the subjects were engaged in physical education. The researchers addressed the prisoners through the speakers that they would now come in to check the microphones and ordered them to lie on the floor, promising that one would be released. The answer was, "We no longer need freedom." Intrigued observers removed the gas from the chamber and opened the doors. A terrible sight met their eyes. The 5-day supply of food was intact. 3 bloodied test subjects begged to close the doors again and turn on the gas. Their bellies were torn open, and apparently they had been feeding on themselves for the last 5 days. The body of the 4th was torn to pieces, and the 5th was sitting in a corner, rummaging in his torn stomach and eating something from there from time to time. The prisoners fought so hard that they broke their bones and tore their muscles, feeling no pain at all. The 3 surviving test subjects were taken to the hospital, nearly breaking the straps binding them. Of these, one minded our immediately, as soon as he closed his eyes. In the autopsy report, it was noted that the oxygen content in his blood was 3 times higher than normal. The subject struggled to stay awake. The rest were placed back in the cell, but one of the observers drew a pistol and shot the commander and one of the test subjects. He aimed the muzzle 0 at the remaining bound test subject. The last test subject was shot dead. Through whom this story became known remains a mystery.
This is the longest true horrifying story episode. This episode is worth the time. The story took place in Nador, Morocco in the year 2015. The story was submitted by Ilyas. Back in 2015, Ilyas was an 18-year-old Moroccan Muslim that lived in Norway. One night, Ilyas was back in Morocco visiting family, and he stayed up late watching a movie at home till 3 in the morning. The living room was very warm, so he got up to open the window for fresh air. As he was at the window, being at the 4th floor in that building, he looks down, and the street was dark and empty, but there was one man wearing black from head to toe with a hood covering his face. He wasn't sure why that man was outside at that time. He looked away, but then peeked one last time out of curiosity. When he looked at him again, the man had his hands on a building's wall. He was strangely just feeling the wall, and out of nowhere, the man vanishes through that wall. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief after what he just witnessed. Ilyas swears that there was no door in that spot. It was just physically impossible. He forgets about this after a while, and then flies back to Norway. 6 months later, in Norway, Ilyas experiences his first ever sleep paralysis, which in Islam is known as Jathum. He vividly remembers having a conversation with a dark figure, and his mom also witnessed him speak in his sleep. He woke up after the paralysis with swollen feet and rashes all over his body. They rushed to the ER, and none of the doctors could diagnose what caused his body to react that way. He was finally discharged after treatment. But after that day, Ilyas was never the same person. He always acted differently. He was antisocial. He was distant from people. And his mom always told him that he needed ruqya. A few months later, they fly back to Morocco for the next holiday season. He was always against his mother's ruqya idea. However, he decided to fight his thoughts and do it. He had a cousin that was also suffering, and she visited a raqi in Morocco quite regularly. So they went together with both of their moms. When they reached, they sat down and waited for their session. Ilyas could hear the raqi in the other room, and he felt extremely uneasy and started to sweat. The Quran recitation, the ruqya, the sounds, made him not even want to look at that direction. He was angry. He went outside for a moment to gain back his senses until their turn finally reached. The raqi called them in and started. Ilyas's cousin immediately started reacting horribly when the Quran started. She was screaming so loud. Ilyas started losing senses throughout his entire body. He was sweating, he was unable to move, and he was shouting from fear. He does pray, and he does read Quran, but he was so confused as to why he was screaming. He felt like he was being tortured. The slightest pinch from the raqi felt like it was a knife stab. It was very powerful, and this is where he felt a jinn's presence inside of him. The following night was the most horrific night for Ilyas. For a whole week, the man was not able to sleep alone, and he would get mentally abused by these demons haunting him. Weeks go by. Ilyas started getting demonic thoughts of harming his own family. He hated everyone. When he would look at his own sister, her face would seem distorted to him. He knows these beings are playing with his head. His whole life turned upside down. He would regularly think of harming his own family, but luckily, he never did. A few months later, Ilyas was back in Norway and life was back to normal. He was relieved that he was in a good state of mind and that the horror was over. At the time, he worked at a local grocery store. After a Christmas celebration at work, which he did not participate in, it was late at night. He was walking one of his colleagues back home from work. She was a young woman and she was scared to walk alone. After they reached outside her place, she asked him, "Where's that other girl that was with us?" "What girl?" Ilyas asked. "There was no one there. It was just you and I." She swore that there was another woman with black hair, pale skin, standing next to him the whole time, staring at Ilyas's colleague with anger. Even though this entity gave Ilyas a break, this jinn was still around, haunting everyone that has intentions towards Ilyas.